Hello everyone, this is Mahadeva the Thunder Wizard, and today I'm going to be answering a question. This is going to be another installment of me answering your questions. If you have a question about stuff that I teach, you can leave a question in the comments section of any of the videos. And if I like the question or have a strong reaction to it and think it's worth discussing, I will make a video about it. So, in this video, we are responding to somebody's question, which is, I've been reading your book, Thunder Shamanism, the Indo-European Medicine Wheel. Before we go any further, if you want to read that book, you can. Go up here to courses.thunderwizard.com and you can look for my books, or you can just go onto Amazon and type in Thunder Shamanism and my book should come up, or you can go to my website, michaelwilliamdenny.com, DENNEY.com, and you'll see all of my books on that website. And so I have a book called Thunder Shamanism. For those of you who are watching the channel and you didn't know that, I've got, I don't know how many books I've written, 30 books about a bunch of different things. And so if you really want to learn, you can go and watch or read those books. Or if you're so cheap you can't tolerate the thought of paying $10 or $15, or if you can't tolerate waiting, learn how to search within my channel, and you can look perhaps on the playlists, or just learn to use search words inside my channel and you can find that book, Thunder Shamanism. So he says, I've been reading your book, Thunder Shamanism, the Indo-European Medicine Wheel, and in it you equate Freyja and the planet Venus with the southeast direction. That is absolutely correct. I was wondering, he goes on, why Venus and or Freyja isn't associated with the west, since she was Vanir in the mythos, and the planet Venus can usually be viewed in the night sky by looking towards the west. Very good question, very logical thinking. That's why I'm here, because I'm here to elucidate the deep meanings of this science. So I am going to answer your question, but the first thing we need to understand is that this is not arbitrary. I didn't arbitrarily place Freyja in the southeast. This is a result of a science. This shamanic practice is a science. What science means, body of knowledge that is found as a result of observation and experimentation. It means that if, assuming that I'm right, and this is a science, if I say that the southeast direction is the direction where, if you work with that direction, you can work directly with the essences of that, including the planet Venus, including the goddess Freyja. But you have a very good question, which is, why isn't she just associated with the West? She is associated with the West because the home of the Vanir, where the Vanir have all their stuff, where they sleep at night, that's where their apartment is, their home is, all their stuff is in the West. But remember, the gods and the goddesses have to go to work. So they have offices. You don't, most of you, unlike me, I live in my office, but most of you don't. Most of you have to get in your car, get into some transportation. You have to go to your office away from your home. And if you're somebody that works, if you're a workaholic, you might spend 15, 20 hours a day in your office, and you only spend a few hours a day at home when you're changing clothes or taking a nap or sleeping, or you got the day off. So the gods are the same. Freyja is associated with the West because she's one of the Vanir, and the Vanir are associated with the West. The god who is the king of the Vanir is Njord. Njord, he is associated with the West and he works there, so he works from home. But Frey, he works in the northwest. Freyja, she works in the southeast. But all their stuff is back in the west. But again, this is not something I'm arbitrarily making up. When you look at the Taoist 8 gates, you look at the 8 directions of the Bagua, you will find out, guess what? The planet Venus is in the southeast. You will also find when you look at the Vedic astrology, you'll look at their planetary directions, their direction wheel. Guess what? You find Venus in the southeast. This is important because the Taoist tradition and the Vedic tradition they don't come from each other. They are completely separate and independent. Now, the Germanic tradition and the Vedic tradition, they actually come from a parental source, which is the Indo-European tradition. So we can logically say, well, yeah, the Germanic and the Vedic, they're going to be similar. But why the heck are the Chinese? Why are they having the same idea as the Vedic and the Germanic, that Venus is in the southeast? Well, that's because it's a science. And it means that shamans, for thousands of years, when they face each of these directions, they interact with the beings and the energy value of those directions, and they came to the same conclusion. I mean, it's a big enough deal that the Germanic and the Vedic come to the exact same conclusion. Because after, they split up, they didn't talk to each other, right? Who knows how many thousands of years ago that was? Probably 7,000 years ago. So this understanding is something that was integral to each of their societies. But when you have the Vedic tradition, to be honest, I mean, we don't really have like I'm the one that synthesized from various sources. I'm the one that synthesized the Germanic 9 worlds and directions because there was a few missing. The Germanic mythology talks about the north, the south, the east, and the west, but it doesn't talk about anything else. So I'm the one that put things together, again, by looking at the Vedic and looking at the Taoist and seeing, oh, this is an energetic fact. This is a science. So I can easily just, know where to put everything. So it means that the planet Venus, and here this is interesting as well. So the planet Venus is very easily associated with the goddess Freyja. Freyja is the goddess of love. She's the goddess of fertility. She's the goddess of everything that we associate with Venus. Physical pleasure, magic, procreation, love, all of that. And so that's obvious. Venus, Freyja, same thing, right? Not necessarily. We know from the Taoist tradition that Venus is in the southeast, the planet. We also know from Vedic astrology that the planet Venus is in the southeast. But the word Venus, where does that come from? I've talked about this numerous times. I probably wrote about it in the books, but I'll share it with you again. The word Venus, Venus, is a Latin word. Latin and Old English, by the way, used to have a much more complicated language. Today, we don't use the case system. It means that you know what I'm talking about based on where I put words in a sentence. In modern day English, the subject is at the beginning of the sentence, and then comes the verb, and then comes the subject. I mean, not the subject, the object. I give my glasses to John, right? So I wouldn't say, John, to my glasses I give. You might get it, but it's a little weird. I wouldn't say, John, to glasses give I. John, give I glasses to. You won't know what I'm talking about because it needs to be in a certain order. But guess what? There used to be a time where it didn't matter where you put the words. Because the way you knew what a word was is because of the end of the word. And so the nominative case, which means usually the subject, in Latin, the end of the word is us. So the us, whenever you see anything that has us at the end of it, Venus, right? That you take the US off, the us sound off, because that's just an ending. And you look at the root. The root of it is what? Wane. Because V in Latin is actually pronounced as a W. The E sound in Latin is pronounced as E. And so the word Venus, when we read it, is actually pronounced Venus. Take the US off because we don't use case endings anymore. And guess what the word is? Wane. So the planet Venus doesn't mean a specific goddess in and of itself. It means the Wanes, the Vanir. So the Vanir are strongly associated with the southeast. Their home is in the west, because that's the home of the Wanes. But the office, because you don't, unless you're me, you don't work from home. You live at home and then you go to work. So in each of the 9 directions, there are specific gods that have lordship over certain directions. And the planet Venus is the planet that lords over the southeast. And as it so happens, Freyja is also mistress over the southeast. But she lives in the west, but she works in the southeast. Does that make sense? So there's a lot more to this. I know on the surface, the Wanes are in the west. Why isn't she in the west? Well, because Njord is lording over the west. She doesn't need to. She has work to do down in the southeast. Frey, he lives in the west also, but he has work to do in the northwest. And if you read the mythology, you will see references that Frey is associated with whom? The elves. And we know from Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, that is a Germanic myth, by the way. That's a traditional Germanic myth that Disney hijacked and turned into a movie, but it's Germanic mythology. So where are the dwarves? The dwarves are in the southeast. The dwarves represent human subconscious magic, because the dwarves are magical beings. They create. So guess who's also associated with that? The goddess Freyja, Snow White and the 7 dwarves. Right? I mean, 7 chakras, Snow White, all of that. So all of these things are there, and we need to really be able to look underneath the surface. I appreciate your question, but that's why. Why is Freyja associated with the southeast and not the west? Because that's her office. Her home is in the west, but Njord is the dad who lives there, and he takes care of that mansion while all the kids are off at work. And then they come home and they relax in the west. It's also a good time to remind people why there's this difference between the Aesir and the Vanir. Some new neo-pagans who haven't really done enough work, and either people don't see the cues and don't do the work, or I'm some kind of amazing detective and I figured this out when nobody else would. I don't know. You guys decide. But the Aesir and the Vanir, a lot of the neo-pagans will say, oh, that's because when the Indo-Europeans came into Northern Europe and conquered the indigenous hunter-gatherers, which, by the way, did happen, they imposed their religion and it got mixed together. And so the Aesir was the Indo-European war gods and the Vanir were the hunter-gatherer earth gods. And so they created the two, and that's why they're at war with each other, because the Indo-Europeans were at war with the... Well, it's a nice theory, but unfortunately it's not true, because we have the only remaining Indo-European religion that has an unbroken connection into prehistory, which is the Vedic. They also have the Aesir and the Vanir. The names have kind of gotten switched around a little bit, and they have the Devi and the Asuras. So the Devas and the Asuras. So the word Asura sounds a lot like Aesir, right? That's because it's the same word. Two different Indo-European dialects, but it's the same word. But you say, hang on a second, the Aesir are the celestial gods and the Asuras are the earthly gods, or the, quote, demons. Well, that can't be right. I'm with you. Somewhere along the line, the Vedics made a switch in the terminology. Indra is called an Asura. He's a deity. He is a god. He is a spiritual power. But at some point, they made this distinction and took the name Asura and applied it to the what we call the Vanir, or the gods of the wind, literally, the gods of the earth plane. They also kind of demoted them a little bit. So the Asuras became associated with negative deities. And so they really played up and sort of turned the heat up on the war between the celestial gods and the terrestrial gods. The Germanic tradition, I think, shows probably the more ancient and perhaps the most, quote, pure aspect of that understanding. That the Vanir weren't demons. They're not bad. And even if you talk to a Vedic person, they'll say, no, the Asuras aren't like demons like in the Christian sense. They're just earthly. They're lower vibrations. So there's still a judgment about it. But originally there wasn't a judgment. There was just the earthly gods that were associated with time, space, magic, fertility. And then there were the celestial gods who were timeless and pure, and they didn't like, things like magic, and they didn't like sex and procreation. They're very conservative, right? So what ended up happening is you see the Vedic tradition actually shows the original Indo-European tradition that got a little more evolved, a little more complicated, and some things got switched around. So the word Asura actually means Aesir, and I don't know what word the Vedics had for the Vanir, but the word for Aesir became used for what we call the Vanir, and they then used the name that is still associated with one of the Germanic gods, Tiu, which means sky. And so they talked about literally the sky gods, the Devi, the sky gods, and the Asuras, the powers. So if you really look at that, in the Vedic tradition, it's the sky gods versus the powers. And in the Germanic tradition, it is the powers versus the earthly gods. And so there it is. So I hope I answered your question there. It's there. You just got to know how to look for it. And I think maybe I'm the only one nowadays that's able to, make all these connections. There you go. Understandable question. Long, complicated answer. I hope that explains it for you, though. So that's it for me, guys. I hope to see you soon. Take care of yourself. Stay safe. If, again, you want to read the books that people are talking about, you can go to courses.thunderwizard.com or michaelwilliamdenny.com. I strongly recommend that everybody learn the power of the Heart Center, which you can learn at the Warrior 90-Day Lightning Qigong, which is at thunderwizard.com. If you want to be a rune reader, or if you want to be a Vedic astrologer, or both, and you want me to go onto the live stream and advertise your own page, where in case you want to make a living out of it, you can go to lockdown.thunderwizard.com, and if you pass the very simple test, I will put up a website for you, and I will advertise you whenever you come onto the live stream and say, hey. All right, so that's it for me. I'll see you guys very soon. Take care of yourselves.